Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of Histology. This is your lab exam 1. This is our last bit. So next week will be exam 1 over Histology section. So I always spend 2 weeks and then give the exam the third week. We ended with glands, and now we're going to be doing connective tissues, muscle tissues, and nervous tissues. Connective will be the biggest, but I have found that 2 weeks is definitely going to be enough to try to get this done, as we are going to need time for bones. Now, as we get started, let's just talk generally enough, very general, non-specific, so to speak, on connective tissues and what they are. Now, they are, as their job implies, they connect. They'll connect things to each other. For example, they can connect the epithelium to the other body tissues, like to muscles. They, like, for example, the reticular lamina of the basement membrane, etc. It binds things together, like the periosteum of bone, providing structure and support like bone and cartilage, or protecting organs and soft tissues like bone, filling space like tissues and blood, fat tissue, adipose, and blood, storing energy like adipose tissue and fat. Fat is adipose tissue, and transporting things like blood and actually lymph. So as we get into this, these are basically some examples in bold there, that some things that kind of do that I like to say. But basically, we want to make sure we know that it connects epithelium to the rest of the body, it binds structures together, provides structural support, protects organs and soft tissues, fills space, stores energy, and transports materials. So all of these are general functions that connective tissues may do. Now, the first thing that I want to mention about connective tissues is kind of this big idea that we need to have down, and that's this concept of an extracellular matrix and what that is. Now, first off, extracellular matrix, remember, this is going to be proteins and stuff and fluids and things outside of a cell. So just real quick, let's say I have a cell here. This is just a body cell, some nucleated cell, and there's an extracellular matrix that's on the outside, usually involving proteins that are attached to or associated to the cell, sticking out around it, and fluids that are around that cell. Now, the extracellular matrix of connective tissue specifically are going to be very important in helping us understand what is going on and what is it that makes this connective tissue unique, because every connective tissue has a unique set of extracellular matrix. Now, first thing I always like to think of with extracellular matrix, you have these two best friends who are on a seesaw together. And these two best friends are on a seesaw together. And the two best friends that are there, one of these best friends that are on it is called ground substance. Now, ground substance is usually going to be liquid, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, the ground substance can be unique to certain things. And the other friend that is riding the seesaw are fibers. And what you basically have, imagine, if you will, that if a tissue was mostly ground substance, then there couldn't be very many fibers. And if a tissue was mostly made up of fibers, there wouldn't be able to be very much ground substance. So anytime our seesaw moves, you have a new tissue. This is what makes the matrix. Okay, the matrix is a balancing act between ground substance and fibers. Now, all connective tissues have this extracellular matrix, and some of them are very fluid, meaning they have a lot of ground substance, and some of them are highly fibrous, which means they would have very little ground substance. So if you have very little ground substance, you're going to be high in fiber, okay? And I want to make sure I kind of associate this mentality. So this is going to be the stuff around the cells that are in this tissue. Some of it is extremely fibrous or even mineralized like bone. Surrounding bone is a very hard mineral component. Surrounding blood cells is mostly liquid. And you can have everything from that extremely tough stuff to not so much, okay? And everywhere in between here. So it is going to be this extracellular matrix which have a protein fiber and a ground substance. And the extracellular matrix produces the majority of connective tissues themselves and is what is going to actually give them their function. Now, it is going to be made up of two things, fibers and ground substance. Now, there are specialized cells, and that's actually where we're going to begin on some of this, is looking at the fibers and cells before we actually get in. Now, the first three fibers, that's the ones we're going to talk about. They're fibers and ground substance around the cells. So let's talk about the fibers, because we know ground substance is the rest of the material. And there are three types of fibers that are going to be found associated to connective tissues. The collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. Now, the first one, collagen fibers, this is by far the most common. You've probably heard people getting collagen injections. Collagen is oftentimes called white fibers because of the way it bundles. It tends to take on an opaque coloration, becomes white. So like the whites of your eyeballs, tendons and ligaments and things that have whitish color are made of this collagen material. And it is strong and flexible. Now, the other one, elastic fibers, is yellow fibers. They're very stretchy and they recoil. Now, I oftentimes like to think between collagen fibers and elastic fibers is that they are two types of things you might find on somebody's underwear. Now, if you go buy a fresh pack of Tidy Whities in the store, some Hanes or some Fruit of the Looms, and you buy these things, they're white, they're crisp, strong and flexible. They're clean and white, strong and flexible. But after a man wears them out for a long time and he sweats in them and things like that, they begin to turn yellow and dingy, and now they're really stretchy. That's the elastic fibers. That's that worn out elastic, okay? So the elastic fibers are called yellow fibers, and the collagen fibers are called white fibers. Reticular fibers are just a whole different ball game. They're found in many organs of the body, like, for example, your liver, your kidney, your spleen, your lymph nodes, things that we basically make pate out of. If you've ever had pate, that gives that consistency to a pate. Now, as we think about these three different fibers, now we have the cells that are associated connective tissue, which are also incredibly diverse. You notice that in epithelial tissues, they all kind of look the same. I mean, there's stem cells and there's mature cells, but there's not a good diversity. There might be a gland cell thrown in the mix there, like a goblet cell, but the rest of it. So it's pretty like low in diversity of cell type. But here we can have many types of cells. Now, I'm going to take the first two in a pair. And the first two is a pair is fibroblast and fibrocyte. Now, fibroblast, when we see the blast gets its name from a word blastose, which means to build or produce. So fibroblast, if they fiber, blastose build, these are fiber builders. They make fibers. They secrete fibrous proteins for the connective tissues. So they are by far the most common because they're the ones that are going to be secreting all the extracellular matrix fibers. Now, fibroblast, most common, secretes the fiber builder. It means fiber maker, fiber builder, fiber producer, fiber maker, right? Fibrocyte, they stay out of sight, so they're second most common, and they maintain the fibers. They're the ones that are going to help to keep them adequate, keep them functioning. They're going to maintain it. They're not going to improve them. they're not going to let them get destroyed either. They're just going to maintain, they keep the status quo, we would say. They maintain the way things were, way it's supposed to be. They just kind of keep it standard. Now, adipocyte, adipo, think of hippo, hippo. Those are the fat cells. Those are the cells, adipocytes are the cells that store fat. These are my cells. They have very big vacuoles in them. A vacuole is a very large cell component, kind of like a very large cell vesicle. You guys, if you had general biology or high school biology, you may remember learning in plant cells they have a large central vacuole. Well, these cells here, they have a vacuole that contains a lot of triglycerides, a lot of fat. Mesenchymal cells, these are the cells that are like the stem cells. Remember how we talked about the basal cells of the epithelials? Well, these are like that, but for connective tissues. When these cells divide and produce what's called a daughter cell, these daughter cells are what goes on to become some of these other connective tissue cells. So they are going to produce other connective tissue cells. They're the stem cells of connective tissue, unique for that. So if a cell that can be anything becomes a mesenchymal cell, it can only become a connective tissue cell. It will not be able to become an epidermal cell or anything like that. Melanocytes produce melanin. That is a skin pigment. So these are the cells that stimulate that. Now, I don't know why macrophages aren't showing up here. This is where this was supposed to be, guys. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this and put that back up. I don't know what happened here. If it's the same way for you, I'm going to save it and repost it so you can have this as a fixed version. Macrophages are the large phagocytes. They're the big eaters. These guys defend against infections by actually eating things like bacteria and viruses and stuff like that. They gobble them up, and they are called the large phagocytes. They eat. Phagocytosis is a process that means cell eating. That's when a cell engulfs large external things. Macrophages are the small phagocytes, my little eaters or small eaters. Macrophages, big eaters. Macrophages, little eaters. Mast cells, they make histamine, mainly histamine, and heparin. These are cells that are near blood vessels. If this blood vessel gets injured or wounded or an infectious agent gets in there, it produces a thing that causes inflammation response to help aid getting my body fighting that infectious agent nearby, and also causes any coagulant, which can make sure we bring lots of nutrients to the damaged area, lots of oxygen, lots of immune cells and things, and phagocytic cells and good things to clean me up, antibodies, and et cetera, et cetera. And then lymphocytes are also the cells found in lymph. These protect against disease as well. Lymphocytes is a type of blood cell. They're a type of white blood cell that are needed for fighting diseases. These are the ones like B cells and T cells you may have heard of. So as we go through that, let's understand that there's basically 5 types of connective tissues. And the first one, I'm not going to worry that you guys know that loose and dense connective tissues are connective tissue proper, but I want you guys to know that loose connective tissues have more ground substance and fewer fibers. So ground substance is usually squishy kinds of stuff. This is oftentimes the very squishy things like what makes very soft organs, where dense is less ground substance but a lot of fibers, and these are things like tendons and ligaments and things like that tend to be very tough. Now, cartilage is its own because its connective tissue is so unique, very gelatinous. Bone is also so unique because it has a very hard ground substance, very mineralized material. Blood and lymph are actually 2 fluid connective tissues. So as we go through these, the more ground substance and fewer fibers, that's going to be areolar, adipose, and reticular tissues that we're going to see here. As we start off, Areolar tissue to me looks like a plate of spaghetti and meatballs. I see all these cells and things that are be present here as the meatballs, and all the different sized fibers present of different types, elastic and collagen fibers both, white and yellow fibers both present, form this kind of complex mesh that looks like a plate of spaghetti to me. Or some people say it looks like what you find in your lint trap in your dryer. Now, they are very loose, open organization, we say. They're fibroblasts. There's a very jelly-like material with a bunch of cells and elastic fibers. Now, where do we find it? It's found through the thin membranes of the body. And it helps to do things like distort and return to shape. It's what also nourishes your skin and any other organs. This tissue is needed because that's where the blood vessels for skin will be associated closely to, because your skin itself, the epidermis, the epithelial layers, actually has no blood vessels in it. All the blood vessels are found down deep in the connective tissues. No blood vessels actually go that close up. So it has to get all of its nutrients from the connective tissues to actually get the blood supply. Now, adipose, I think it looks like popcorn. If you eat too much popcorn, you might get fat. This is body fat. When you look at the picture, it looks fluffy and white. You'll have all this is that vacuole with all the triglycerides in it. And you'll see the cell membrane around it with the nucleus that gets pushed out to the side. Nuclei get pushed out by all the fat that's present, squeezes it out, squeezes a nucleus out, kind of like, because it takes up so much room, it pushes the cell's nucleus out. So it looks very white with pink around it. It's found under the skin. It's found around joints. It's found padding organs like the kidneys and other organs. It's also found in some abdominal membranes. Now, I personally think, because it doesn't matter to us. Yeah, okay. I mean, it is found in the greater omentum of the attached to the stomach, but that doesn't mean much to you guys at this level. And the way I always try to say is, I think it needs to be more generalized on the structure sheets. But things like beneath the skin, around joints, padding organs, those are big things I think absolutely need to be talked about. Now, it stores fats. The triglycerides are stored there in these, what we call big vacuoles. And it's there as an energy reserve and a pad to absorb shock for the body. Okay? So like I said, now these images here, these are the ones I'm using. And I've got a thing at the to show you guys at the end as well. Now, reticular connective tissue, very loose again. You'll see a little bit of fiber here. These very black fibers in this are stained. These are reticular fibers, and then there are these cells, types of blood cells that might be present. We call that pulp. And it's found in liver, spleen, and lymph nodes. So think about dog food, liver-flavored dog food. I see a dog food here. It's what I see when I look at this. I think of dog food. And it forms a framework of these squishy organs, like your liver, spleen, and lymph nodes. It forms the three-dimensional framework for those, okay? Now, some of these will have more functions, and some only have one. Now, remember, for the exam, you're going to identify the tissue, give me one of its locations and one of its functions on the practical. Now, some of these have multiple ones, so I might come back on a multiple choice question and say, hey, which of these is or is not a function or location of this tissue that maybe I didn't either ask on the practical part or something that I know is really important. Locations and functions will be one of the most important things you retain for A&P2 and throughout A&P1. Okay, locations and functions is the really big thing that you know what these things are doing. Okay, now dense connective tissues, remember, are mostly fibers, but not very much ground substance. Again, remember my analogy of the seesaw where ground substance and fibers are together on a seesaw to make matrix. And when this goes up, this goes down. If this goes up, this goes down, just like a seesaw. Okay? And if we think about it like that, it helps us kind of understand that every time we change this balance of my seesaw, I get a new tissue. So we have dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic tissues, all of which are very different, distinctive with its own things going on. Now, as we look at it, dense connective tissue to me looks like wavy bacon. I think of bacon. Think about bacon, chewy, crispy, yummy bacon. Okay, bacon makes everything better. And it's because everything goes in the same line here, is that with bacon, with this wavy bacon here, everything goes in that same line. The fibers go parallel with the force. They run in the direction with the force they're resisting. So a tendon running this way, the force is obviously being applied in that direction. So it'd be trying to be pulled apart. So it is there in things like tendons and ligaments. It's also in something called an aponeurosis, but we don't really care so much about aponeuroses right now. We'll talk about two aponeuroses. We'll talk about the gala aponeurotica, or the epicranial aponeurosis in muscles, and we'll talk about the rectus sheath in muscles. But it's usually just big bands of connective tissue that attach muscle together. Muscle to muscle kind of deal. Now, it's always there for stability and exertion of force, okay? It helps us exert a force, okay? So as you look at it, the connective tissues are generally easiest to tell apart. Now, elastic tissue, to me, kind of looks a little bit more fatty here, and I don't have a good visual analogy for that, for elastic tissue, but elastic tissue looks like dense, regular, but with more white in it. Because that white's going to have the elastic fibers kind of stuck in there too, making it very elastic. So it's elastic, and collagen gets added together in this very stretchy material, okay? This is usually found in so the elastic, it's dominated mostly by elastic. There is a little bit of collagen, but it's mostly yellow fibers. It also runs parallel again, so it runs in a straight line, but there's going to be more white visible in the elastic. Now, it's found in the elastic ligaments of your vertebrae, which is, there's the names of them. It's called the nuchal ligament, ligamentum flavum. But we're not going to care about that. You will learn that in articulations section, joints, chapter 9 in lecture. The suspensory ligaments of the penis are also there as well. And this allows expansion and stability of vertebrae in the penis. So they can be torn, but they are attached to the penis themselves. There are actually elastic ligaments, though the penis itself, a ligament attaches bone to bone, and there is no bone in the human penis. We still call it elastic ligament. Now, dense irregular meat looks like hamburger meat, kind of ground hamburger meat here, except here it's kind of purple colored. It's extremely fibrous, but the fibers run in all these weird directions. You can see fibers are going here, there, side to side, up, down. Here's some cut across, some coming out of the screen and towards the screen, some coming across, some coming at angles. So various directions. Here you can see we cut them across the fiber. Here they're going that way. Here they're going up, down, side to side, left, right, top and bottom, front and back. So it's found in the periosteum of bone. It's found in joint capsules. It surrounds your muscles. And it's also found in the deep layer, the reticular layer of the dermis. And there it forms a network that allows us to strengthen and support areas where there's stress and things like that. Okay, now there's some other things. For example, this is actually what allows the different parts of muscle, two muscles, to slide against each other. If you've ever cut a Christmas ham, this is that white stuff in your ham. Around each big old piece of muscle, there's this white stuff. That's what it is. It's dense irregular connective tissue, or just pure collagen. You're like, how in the world do you eat meat? Actually, I don't eat meat. So I'm not grossed out by it. It's really more of a health choice than it ever, than it is I'm not angry anybody eats meat and things like that, but generally I don't eat meat, and I will eat it from occasion, but for the most part I don't. Let's just say for the most part I'm a vegetarian. But I nibble on some things if I get my hands on it. So, okay. Now, our fluid connective tissues, which is almost, there's pretty much no fibers in the matrix, really only fluid. Now, there is the ability to make fibers, especially in blood. That'll be something we'll talk about in the blood chapter in AP2. But blood itself has the ability to make fibers, but there should be no fibers in healthy blood until you get injured, and then it coagulates, and those fibers are converted into a non-soluble form where it solidifies the blood. And so blood and lymph, these are two fluids. Now, this is the only picture of blood that we had. We could get a better picture of blood. This is one I took myself under a microscope, and it wasn't the greatest, but I wanted one. The book didn't have blood, and here I wanted one that had red blood cells, a white blood cell. This is the most abundant white blood cell, and some platelets scattered in here. But blood has 3 cells called formed elements in them, and these formed elements actually are made in red bone marrow. They are erythrocytes, which are the red blood cells, which we can see most of them here. These things here look like Cheerios floating in milk. Leukocytes, white blood cells, and that's one right here looking like a fly that fell in our blood here. Almost looks like a cowboy hat. I want to put that on. Something's like, what in coagulation? I don't know. You don't see the what in tarnation meme that much anymore, but I like dead memes. And then thrombocytes, that's our platelets, tiny little fragments seen around and about in the cell here in the blood. And it's found in the circulatory system, found in blood vessels, and it transports stuff through the body. So if I did tag blood, I would just put this picture up there. It's not my favorite picture of blood. There's a lot better images of blood out there. This is just one we ended up using. The 2 fluids aren't actually in our book until you get like a real actual slide. This is a Wright's stain of blood. So red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, erythrocytes, leukocytes, thrombocytes. Now, blood, as we said, has those cells in it, okay? Lymph, now this is actually in a lymph node, but lymphocytes, these are actually a bunch of lymphocytes, but they're really small. And I really would want to actually have lymph, where you would take a lymph node, even a lymph node aspiration. You can actually sometimes see that. I'll do that kind of quick. Is a lymph node aspiration, and you can sometimes see with a lymph node aspiration is a good way to see lymph, where you took lymphocytes out. And these are all lymphocytes, okay? And this is really what we should be seeing, is a bunch of that in a lymph node, canines, whether or not it's a mammal. These are malignant lymphomas, but these are used diagnostic tools where you stick a needle and we do what's called a lymphoid aspirate. And I think that's one of the best ways to get the image we really want is lymph node aspirate. And so this is just something in lymph node aspiration that you can get. So I probably will change it up to that. Now, it has 3 major functions of the lymphatic system, 2 of which we're going to discuss right now. But it is monitored for infections, and we return fluids back to circulation. It also is it reclaims fluids lost when blood supply. So we'll talk about that later on in AP2. But it's basically going to recirculate fluid and be monitored for an infection. This fluid ends up in things like lymph nodes, and we end up fixing it. Now, the bone is going to be the easiest one to know, and then the 3 types of cartilage, hyaline, elastic, and fibrous, has their own special tricks to them that I can help you guys understand. So let me help you understand those. Now, bone, the first thing about bone, it looks like tree rings to me. Looks like somebody cut a tree. Very easy to tell bone. Now, bone is very strong, calcium calcified things resist shattering. It's organized in rings called osteons. It's found in your bones of the skeletal system. It's good for support and protection. Now, first thing I want you guys to be able to identify is where the cells are here. The cell is called an osteocyte, and they are found in little chambers here called a lacuna. Lacuna or lacunae. So, I mean, I know some of you guys this will help you retain it, because as soon as, so he lives in a lacuna inside the bone, osteocyte. Osteocytes live in lacuna matata. And the lacunae here contain our osteocytes, and they are trapped in this matrix of bone that's going to be found all throughout here, very mineralized material. And in that matrix, there's a canal called a central canal, and radiating out of those fine lines here called, it means little canal, canaliculi, which means little canal. And covering the outer surface is the periosteum. Now, two things I could do on here. I could tag and say, name the tissue, bone. Or I could put a bracket around an osteon and say, name that. Or name this hole, central canal. Name this little thing here, lacuna. Name these small channels, canaliculi. So I could do that, small channel. So I could actually ask you to identify some of those structures, okay, of a bone histology. And I will. Actually, it will be on there. There'll be one question where I may also say name the tissue, but I may come back and be like, okay, what is the name of this structure pointed to by the arrow? Be specific. Now, cartilage is very gel-like. It has a very gelatinous ground substance. The cells in cartilage are called chondrocyte. Chondro means cartilage. And they're shock absorbers, okay? Chondrocartilage, osteobone, okay? Osteocyte, bone cell. Chondrocyte, cartilage cell. So hyaline cartilages here, hyaline, have squeezed together lacuna. So the lacunas will be found in one chamber, at least 2s and 3s. Here we have one lacuna, and we have two cells packed together. 2s, or even 3s. So you will see 2s and 3s sometimes. That's the only one that will have 2 or 3 cells packed in the same lacuna. It's the only one that can have 2 cells in the same lacuna. There are collagen fibers sometimes that might be visible here, but rarely because of the stains used. They're found in synovial joints, your rib tips, your nasal septum, and your trachea. Stiff but flexible, and reduces friction between bones. Now, the thing is, what you're going to do is this is one of the places where, like I said, that flashcards do work, but ultimately do what we talked about in study group. Now, I couldn't attend the first study group. If you guys are able to make it there on Fridays, top floor of the library, I do have a tutor there as well. I need to get Christine's information out to you guys so you can meet with Christine Chapman, my tutor. But I may also have a second tutor, Renee Mosley, who may also be able to work with you right now. Both of them are pre-med students, so they would be glad to help. Elastic cartilages, they are going to be containing a lot of fibers in their matrix as well, a lot of elastic fibers, and you can see them here. And again, you may, one cell per lacuna, now they may be together, but here you have in hyaline cartilage more than one cell to a lacuna. These look like black-eyed peas to me. This looks like black-eyed peas. Black-eyed peas, they're fergalicious. Elastic cartilages are fergalicious. It's your external ear, like your ear flaps, and your epiglottis. These are supportive, but they bend easily and recoil easily. So you can flick them and they go back. Now, parts of the nose do have this elastic cartilage in it as well, but not all of the nose. Now, fibrous cartilage or fibrocartilage, you can see the fibers here as well. The cells tend to spread out a little bit more, and I see bubble wrap right here. Now, it will have fibrous matrix, and you can see these wisps of fibers there. They are many, many collagen fibers in the matrix. Unlike here, they are there, but you may not see it, but there's a lot of collagen here in this. These are in the intervertebral discs and between the pubic bones and your meniscus. It's actually the pads of the knee joints called the menisci. So if you've ever torn a meniscus, especially your medial meniscus, if you were an athlete, it is possible you did. I usually have one student who had a torn meniscus and probably also tore their ACL and their MCL. They probably tore their anterior collateral ligament and their medial collateral ligament. Anterior cruciate ligament. Did I say anterior collateral ligament? It's anterior cruciate ligament. Excruciatus comes from. So it hurts a lot. It's excruciating. Excruciate. It crosses. Now, it limits movement, prevents bone-to-bone contact as well. Again, these are things that try to prevent arthritis, but could be attacked and can end up causing some problems between your vertebrae, vertebral compressions, things like that. Degenerative disc diseases and things. So, now, muscle, so now we come out of connective tissues, we go to muscles. Now, I oftentimes like to say a muscle cell, muscle tissues are just connective tissues that forgot how to secrete fibers. And you're like, what? Well, they don't have fibrous stuff on the outside, but they have fibrous stuff on the inside. They're very interesting. And that's the way I like to think about them sometimes. And you're like, he's weird. I don't get it, but I'll show you what I mean when we get in it. They are specialized for contraction, and they help move the body when they contract. Now, the first one that we want to talk about is skeletal muscles. Now, skeletal muscles, there are 3 different types of muscle tissues I'm going to talk about here. And, oh gosh, my camera froze up. I don't know what causes it to do that. I can't draw now. And I can't unplug it and plug it back in and it work. And then I can't reload the whiteboard. So I can't do a drawing now that I normally would try to do. I can't actually even close this now. It freezes up the software and messes up, and you can't reload it when you're just going, so I have to just keep going. I'm sorry. Normally I try to do this. I don't know. There's always little annoyances. For some reason, it freezes sometimes, even if you don't hit anything, and you can't undo that. Skeletal muscle tissues are found in skeletal muscles. Now, here's something I always like to ask in a multiple choice question. You're guaranteed to see which ones are voluntary striated. So we call this voluntary striated. Why is it called voluntary and striated? Because it is under voluntary control, and the cells have these striations on them. These are overlapping proteins, and instead of secreting the proteins, they keep it inside. This is why I say a muscle cell is a connective tissue cell that forgot how to secrete. They're very long and thin, unbranched, but multiple nuclei. Each cell will have more than one nucleus on it. So you can see here's a nucleus and there's a nucleus of the same cell. Here's 2 nucleuses of the same cell, and striations and thin, fibrous things. Multinucleated, unbranched, long and thin, called a muscle fiber. They look like logs to me, stacked up. Okay. And so it is important that you guys know that it is voluntary striated. I can control it. Cardiac muscles, they're found in the heart. Its home is where the heart is. It is involuntary striated. As you will see, there are striations that are visible here. All these striations. Yet you cannot control the heart. Your heart beats on its own. It does not, you cannot tell it to stop. You can put yourself in a mental state to increase or decrease it a little bit. You can get yourself all worked up, or calm yourself down, try to get it. But these cells are involuntary, and they're striated cells. They are called cardiocytes. They are branched, and they also generally have one nucleus. They don't generally have, they have one nucleus. So you'll see the one nucleus, and they're attached by these things called intercalated discs. They intercalated discs, and they're regulated by what's called pacemaker cells or an autorhythmic cell to make them beat. They don't need the brain to tell it to beat, but they will use the nervous system to slow them down or speed them up, as we'll find later on, especially near the end of AMP1 and in AMP2. Now, smooth muscle is found in any hollow organ your body has. If you have a hollow organ, a blood vessel, the bladder, your digestive tract, reproductive tract, respiratory tract, any hollow tubes in the body, they have this associated to it, and they're involuntary, which means I cannot control it. And they're non-striated, which means they have no interlocking proteins that cause striations, so hence smooth. Now, voluntary is skeletal, and the rest are involuntary. Cardiac is involuntary and striated. Smooth muscle is involuntary, non-striated. They're very tapered, spindle-shaped cells, as you see here. I think they look like taffy, stretched out taffy. That's what I see. I see taffy. I don't know why. Now, the last one is neural tissue that we're going to talk about today. And they have cells that conduct signals. They're very good at rapidly sensing our environment, telling what's going on inside the body and outside. So they rapidly sense my internal environment, like blood pressure changes and things like that. My belly got full, to external environment, like a bee sting or a needle stick or cold that got on me, something hot, something cold, something touched me, a bug landed on me. They then process that information and control responses because of that, like withdrawal responses or pain. You go, ow, and you might want to defend yourself or something like that. That's mostly found in your brain and spinal cord. Most of it is concentrated in what's called your central nervous system, your brain and your spinal cord. We will talk more about that in our last lab section for nervous system. Now, there are two cells that make up neural tissue or nervous tissue. One of those is the neuron, and the other one's the neuroglia. Now, I think about nervous tissue. It's like Batman. I'm Batman. And there's Batman, and then there was like Robin or Alfred or Lucius who helped Batman. So the neuron's the Dark Knight. It's Batman. It's the cell the nervous system needs, not necessarily the one it wants. It's a dark light. It's a dark knight, the one that guards Gotham. Okay? It's the neuron is neuron. The neuron is the cell that does all the work. It actually produces, conducts electrical impulses. But the helper cells, neuroglia, that's like Alfred, who repairs and supplies nutrients to Batman. It's like, hey, I'm going to patch Batman up. Or Lucius, who's like, hey, here's the Batmobile. Here's a Batsuit. Go have fun with that. Of course, I'm talking about the Christopher Nolan Batman. I'm Batman. And the neuron has a cell body. The cell body is this big part here. Dendrites are these branches that look like trees coming off of the cell body, and the thin extension here is called an axon. Now, one of the things is I might have this picture here for nervous tissue, but I'm going to give you a blank version of this neuron and have you identify things like cell body, dendrite, or axon. It will be on there. It's going to be on the test, okay? So definitely study cell body, dendrite, and axon off this diagram here, and there's one in the back. Now remember, the supporting cells, neuroglia, that's again like Alfred, who supports Batman, repairs him, fixes him up, feeds him, gets him ready to fight crime again another day. You know, because who knows when Gotham might need him. Okay. So that's nervous tissue here. And this is the diagram, the slide I would use for nervous tissue. Now, last thing I'm going to talk about is membranes, okay? Membranes, these are physical barriers. These are things that cover the body inside of the body. They line parts of the body. For example, they line the inside of the sinus cavities. They line the outer surface of the body. There's always an epithelium in a connective tissue. It's always in conjunction. Always an epithelial lining with connective tissues under it. Now, sometimes we add things on top of the epithelium, like mucus. But we're going to see that we have an epithelium and connective tissue supporting that epithelium, okay? But they cover parts of the body. Like the outside of the body, you have a membrane. Inside the body, there's multiple membranes. So let's look at them. The membranes are going to be mucous membranes, serous membranes, cutaneous, and synovial membranes that we're going to see. So let's take a look at these membranes. And the first one's a mucous membrane. Now, mucous membranes are going to be associated to anything that's open to the outside world, like your sinus cavities. Your nasal cavity, that's got a mucous membrane called a mucosa. Your digestive tract, respiratory tract, urinary tract, reproductive tract. These are all exposed some way to the outside world. So there is a moistness to it that is on it, which to keep it moist is the mucus that's secreted on it to help facilitate things like absorption and stuff like that. So these are places to help me absorb gases, things like that, or absorb other materials, digestive juices, things like that, reproductive. And there is what's called a lamina propria called areolar tissue, which that's just the connective tissue that supports the epithelium. Now, serous membranes. Now, I always like to draw this out, but I can't draw now. And I'm sorry if you can hear my dog. Every time I record, she hears me. I guess I get worked up. I don't know. Oh, it's one of our dogs who's just loud. Now, they line the body, but they're not open to the outside world. These are internal sealed membranes. And there is always going to be a serous fluid that they produce, but they're thin and strong because the areolar tissues associated to them. They always have two parts. There's a part lining the body cavity called parietal part. Parietal portion lines the body cavity, okay, nearest the body wall, we would say. You probably saw this in lecture. Also, there's a visceral portion of it that covers the organs called a serosa. They both produce on their epithelial side a serous fluid called transudate that acts as a lubricant to reduce friction. And when infection happens, these stop producing serous fluid, so this mesothelium here will rub against mesothelium up there, and they'll rub against each other as you breathe, like pleurisy, because you're no longer producing serous fluids. Now, serous membranes, the pleura with its visceral and parietal layer, actually lines the pleural cavities covering the lung. The pericardium lines pericardial cavity, covers the heart. Peritoneum is in the peritoneal cavity, which covers all your abdominal organs, like your guts and things, okay? This guy must be a youth pastor. He's got the soul patch. He's either that or he's in a band. I don't know, or a youth pastor and he wants to be cool, so he has a soul patch. Cutaneous membrane is your skin. Where do you get a cut? You get a cut on your skin. Okay, it covers the surface of the body. It's very thick, waterproof, and dry, not mucousy. The only time where like your skin is always very dried out for the most part, waterproof, dry, and thick. Places are thicker than others on the outer surface. The other things that are like this are mucosa. Synovial membranes are any articulating joint cavity in the body. They have a synovial fluid as a lubricant, and they always protect ends of bones, preventing bone-to-bone contact. Now, it says lacks a true epithelium. That's because there's gaps. I just don't think lacks a true epithelium is a very important thing. The big thing here, I want you guys to know that synovial joints are found in articulating joints and produce synovial fluid. That's really what you need, and protect the ends of bones. This is where you might get gout. Gout crystals actually will accumulate in here. So sometimes If you go become a phlebotomist, you actually may have to stick a needle into somebody's synovial joint and collect synovial fluid to check for all the purines that are found there from nucleic acid metabolism. If somebody eats a lot of the liver and things, they may get gouty arthritis or gout, and you may actually have to stick a needle into that. And that is something you do. So here's my study guide, so you guys can go through that. Now, there's some things I had some reviews, some basic things, number of layers and shapes. I think it's very useful to make a concept map, and I've started off a basic one to get you going. This, I will label one of these 4 things on the test. I don't know, I'm not going to tell you which one, but one of the 4 things. And I will label one of these 3 things on this diagram on your test. So this picture and that picture are both on there for you to actually identify things. Now, if you go into D2L, again, under content, and you go in here to my lab, AP1 lab, I keep going past it, going to my lecture all the time, and you click on content. What you're going to see is some flashcards, and these flashcards are the images, exact images that I use on this test from this flashcard. Literally, I took this set of flashcards, I opened it up, I put these images that are on here into the exam, okay? Now, I do not, these are the pictures in the PowerPoint, so you should be able to go through the PowerPoint and identify them, okay? And make your flashcards from here of the ones you're going to have to identify. Now, if it's not in there, you won't have to identify it, but I could ask multiple choice questions about them. The multiple choice stuff is going to be from any text in my notes, okay? You will take this test by clicking on quizzes, and right here it is. And I don't know why I really like the attendance quiz, because I don't report your attendance. It's mostly so I could get the lockdown browser attached to you guys with that before you take a test. Now, I'm actually going ahead and working on your bones test very soon. I'll probably be working on it this week, staying ahead of the game. I know exactly what I want to do. It's just I have to make them in, because I was teaching in the spring AP2, and I only taught AP2 in the summer, so I haven't taught AP1 since we went online. But I've been teaching AP1 for years. I've been teaching this class since 2009, so I think I know what I'm doing. So you don't have to worry about me not having it ready to go for you guys. Okay, so I hope this lecture helps a lot, me giving you some tips and tricks. I always like to give you guys some little visual analogies, but here's the instructions. Like I said, when you go to print these off, you hit File, Print, and then when you go into print 2 slides and print this 2 to a page, basically fold the sheet in half, and you cut them across the fold, label the blank, and then fold them over on themselves as well. So what I kind of mean is, on this page, fold it over like that. Print it 2 to a page, cut these apart, fold these in half. Fold those in half, okay? If that makes sense, so you have a picture on one side, name, locations, functions on the other side. Fill those out and then use them to study with. But if you do not know the answer, if it doesn't come out of your head, you don't know it. Write these things down sometimes. Get in with a study group. Have them quiz you. Okay? Guys, thank you so much. If I can get everything set, I'll also try to do a little special review session this week. Maybe I can do it on Friday. Friday would be a good day to do a study session, maybe extra. So, guys, thank you so much. I will email you, let you know. But, guys, this includes lab number 2. Thank you, guys, and have a great day.